Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. My name is Pilar Ortiz, and I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant, a company where we help managers of remote teams to get the most out of online collaboration. You can find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com. Hello and welcome to episode 314 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. My name is Pilar Ortiz and today is a What's Going On episode. So I'm here with Maya Middlemiss. Hello, Maya.
Hello, Pilar. Hello, everyone.
And well, we've got maybe a shorter episode. You never know with these things.
We always say that.
But definitely we've got less What's Going On articles that we are covering. And actually all 3 or 4 of them are under, I think we could put them under the umbrella of some kind of danger of presenteeism. So if you bear with us, maybe that's the thread. So if we haven't met before, as I said, my name is Pilar Ortiz. I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant, and you can find out everything about us over on virtualnotdistant.com, including the links of the articles that we're going to be talking about today. So let's start with with an article that made me sad. And it made me sad on so many different levels. And it always seems more fun to talk about the sad articles. And this is an article from Vox.com that came out on September 22nd, 2022. And it's called Remote Workers Are Wasting Their Time Proving They're Actually Working, with the subtitle, Productivity Theatre is Getting Worse. And really, that's what the article is about. It's about the fact that people are feeling like because they are away physically from each other and from their managers, that they have to be proving that they're around and proving they're working. And in a nutshell, this is resulting on a lot of wasted time. So we'll come to some examples in a second. How did you react to this article, Maya?
Well, exactly the same, really. This whole idea is just really sad. The lack of trust, the lack of the measuring the wrong things, just everything about this is so wrong. Maybe it's an inevitability, but it shouldn't be. That, we really should be able to do better than this now that there are choices about where people work and how work is measured and valued. This is a phenomenon does make me sad. I saw something recently which would accompany this as well, that somebody was actually marketing a physical device for jiggling your mouse remotely.
Aww.
That you could leave your mouse on your desk and then every few minutes it would give it a shake so your green light came back on or whatever. And just the existence of this product category, that somebody's designed and created that. We've got such innovation going on in some respects, and yet it's just to prop up this dreadful idea of performative presenteeism and performative productivity that's deceptive on both sides. And it's just heartbreaking, really.
That thing that you just said about the mouse, that is really really
I should have put the link in here. I'll see if I can find it. Somebody shared it on Twitter because I just thought, oh God, why does this have to exist? This isn't what we meant.
Yes. And there's a couple of things that come to mind. One is the fact that this might be happening. So the statistics that they have in this article says 85% of bosses say hybrid work makes it hard to be confident that employees are being productive. So it is happening. There is that perception from bosses, as it says here, saying, we're not sure, which is very odd because we saw during the pandemic that people were being even more productive.
Yes, and there's enough data now, surely, that, you can reassure yourself that you're, and why don't you just measure what they're actually doing instead of the mouse jiggling?
Yes. But the flip side of that for me is that people might feel like they have to show they're present without any data to confirm that they need to as well.
Yes, I'm sure that's a big part of this, is the other side, this kind of insecurity that people have about showing up and being noticed, particularly maybe in a hybrid setting where other people are going to be noticed because they're there.
Yes, exactly. I think that you bring up a very good point, the hybrid in the fact that we might think we're being seen in a different way to other colleagues. Therefore, in order to make that equal, we start to do stuff that actually is not that productive. Some of the things that the article mentions, it says and this is what makes me really sad, they update their status on Slack or toggle their mouse to make sure the status light in Microsoft Teams is green. They say hello and goodbye, and they drop into different channels throughout the day to chit chat. They check in with managers and just tell anyone what they're working on. They, they even join meetings they don't need to be in, and there are many more meetings, and answer emails late into the night. What makes me really sad about this, and aside from the fact that this is going on, because this is some kind of anxiety being reflected in this, is the fact that some of this is what we've been describing as aspects of visible teamwork, which are things designed to help us feel closer together, more connected, and building some of that team spirit online. But of course, you can also use them to show you're there. And I was like,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah, it's about this whole thing of psychological safety in the end. Are we feeling that we've got to use these things to show up, to kind of make ourselves feel equal or make ourselves feel seen in the digital workspace? Or are we actually using them as visible teamwork was designed to make our work presence have an impact? It's really icky feeling, this idea that people will still need to be doing this. But I suppose it's what people have done at work forever.
Yeah.
Presenteeism, trying to be the first to arrive or the last to leave, or make sure your jacket's on the back of the chair when you nip out for a cigarette break or whatever. This idea of trying to be everywhere at once. And people do it on social media as well, trying to show up that they're everywhere and use the digital tools available. So maybe it's an inevitability. It just still feels really disappointing that there isn't more trust and autonomy and self-confidence that you don't need to do that.
And you mentioned psychological safety, and I'm thinking that maybe this is something that we need to be making explicit in the workplace as well. So it could be one of the scenarios we're just referring to could be that actually bosses, managers, whatever, people in charge don't have an issue with people working from home, but we feel like they do, and therefore we do this. But if we don't make explicit that thing of, look, we trust you, or let's look at your results or whatever, then how are they going to know?
Yes, and maybe if they came from somewhere that was trust was not implicit, and they couldn't take it for granted, or maybe they feel they have to compete against co-located employees or colleagues, and wherever that insecurity is coming from, it's not necessarily coming from the manager's behavior. It could be something very much internal to the team member who feels they've got to keep showing up and raising their hand and bumping into people online, even if that's completely unnecessary. And the manager absolutely trusts them 100% to get on with it.
And something else they say, so in regards to that, is about, and I quote, about a third of all workers said they feel more pressure now to be visible to leadership than they did a year ago. And this is from September, July 2022, regardless of their work accomplishments, according
That's
to...
got to be a hybrid impacting on that.
Yes.
It has to be.
Yeah.
Now people feel that there are people back in the office. If they're defending their right to work from home, they feel they're up against that maybe. And that's the biggest shift then from a year ago, surely.
Yeah, I think you're completely right that there was, when everyone was in the same setup, then we didn't feel we needed to prove much because it was obvious that we were all doing stuff. And now when there's that separation, this is really interesting. I hadn't thought of that, of the hybrid component being so important, not just a lack of trust. So that was unpublished August data from Qualtrics. So it's just from August, you're completely right. And something that this, you know how you get into rabbit holes when you look at articles, they mentioned it was a study done that GitLab was involved in around asynchronous communication and stuff. And the reason why I mention this is that they come up with a very interesting term that I hadn't heard of before, Maya, and that's async privilege, which is the fact that C-suite execs, and usually people in higher in positions higher up the organizational ladder, that they work on their own timetable. They've got that ability. So the statistics here from this other study by GitLab and I think Catalog, 74% of C-suite execs are able to work on their own timetable compared to 24% of junior staff. So
yeah,
it just
super
brought me to that.
interesting. Yes, I've never heard that phrase conceptualized before, but of course it's blindingly obvious at the end of the day that the more senior you are in any role, the more control and flexibility you're likely to have over how you spend your time. And when that comes to communicating, especially when you're not co-located, that immediately maps onto how async you can be. That if you're not expected to be working like pair with somebody else or in constant synchronous meetings and so on, you might well have had that trust all along. And maybe the privilege also comes from the trust that comes with a more senior role. That you've been promoted internally possibly or hired against more of a track record. So it's just, okay, you go and get on with it and see you at your next performance review or your next milestone or whatever. And but that very clearly correlates with how async you can be. And it's brilliant that this research has highlighted that, because I'd never really thought about that as a concept either.
And I'm surprised because that particular piece is from July 2022 and we're now mid-October. So
it's not had a high profile, has it? It's that I think when maybe we need to see a bit more of that phrase async privilege and not have it get lost in everything else.
Definitely. Maybe with the more broader uptake and realization that we need to work more asynchronously, then maybe this will surface.
Yes, let's face it, most people still aren't talking about async yet, never mind inequalities within it.
Yeah, really interesting. And we've got the next article actually follows on, but I don't want anyone to forget how none of this is new. Although, as you say, I really think that the hybrid thing has really heightened our awareness of it. But of course, Maya, you wrote an article in our blog in 2017.
About 5 years ago.
Yes, and actually what you were talking about was the hybrid setup, because you said, now that I'm remote, can anyone see how hard I'm working? And it also had that tint of people still being in the office and you not being.
I suppose at that time, casting our minds back, that was when remote work was this idea of a sort of managed process and something that you pilot and you evaluate and opt in and out of and so on. And then we had everything that's happened in between, and now we've got hybrid as a kind of a default, perhaps with even less planning and preparation. But exactly the same issues of people feeling that if they're not physically present, somehow they've got to make more of an effort to shout about their digital presence, perhaps.
Yeah. So listeners, that I would put the link to that specific article, which is on the blog. And if you enjoyed that and don't mind going back a few years in time, we do have a collection of blog posts published as a book called Thinking Remote, which I think there's about 12 of those articles by Maya and myself. And we've got that in audio, in ebook, and in paperback. It's now feeling a little bit old-fashioned, but it's there.
It's true, but even just the fact that we're reflecting on this new data today shows that those principles actually, even though the context may have massively changed, I think the things that we talked about in Thinking Remote are these really core issues that haven't gone away because they haven't been fixed.
Yeah, you're right. So talking about all this presenteeism, etc., I thought it would also be interesting to bring up a recent study, which is going to be published in December in the Computers in Human Behavior Reports. And this, I came across this through Eva Rimbaud-Gilabert, who is always sharing loads of evidence-based stuff. And she's, of course, an academic. And the title of this paper is The Impact of Electronic Monitoring on Employees' Job Satisfaction, Stress, Performance, and Counterproductive Work Behavior, a meta-analysis. And I thought, just to tell listeners what it's about, I just thought I'd read some of the abstract, just as a summary of what this is about. Organizations all around the world increasingly use electronic monitoring to collect information on employees' working behavior. To investigate the effects of electronic monitoring on employees' job satisfaction, stress, performance, and counterproductive work behavior. Results indicate that electronic monitoring slightly decreases job satisfaction and slightly increases stress. Moderator analysis suggests that performance targets and feedback may further exacerbate these negative effects on workers. Furthermore, maintaining and improving the performance of employees is an important justification of electronic monitoring. However, the current meta-analysis found no relationship between electronic monitoring and performance. In addition, current research on the effects of electronic monitoring lacks the examination of processes of why organizations implement electronic monitoring and how electronic monitoring and work design are related to each other. I love how much this opens up as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that you can look at it and say, well, duh, do we need a meta-analysis of all these different studies to tell us the things which are surely common sense, that when you breathe down people's necks like this, it doesn't make them happier or more productive, and it can make them a bit more stressed. I mean, it's exactly what we were saying, about the previous article. What are you even measuring electronically? How often their mouse jiggles? Because how does that correlate with their productivity? So it's good that there's more data on this, and I'm glad that people are looking at it academically, but I'll be surprised if anyone's that surprised with the outcome.
I have to admit that I haven't gone into the body of it, but one thing that does come to mind is that there's so many different ways of monitoring what people are doing as well. So the first one that comes to mind is the online one. But then also when you start to implement new ways of working in the office, there's also monitoring there going on. And I find it very interesting that even that could, I mean, I don't know whether they covered this here, but even that can give you a sense of stress, even if the reasons, because this is so important that they're saying, hey, we need to look at the reasons why, even if the reason is to understand how the physical space is being used, but even that might have some stress factor in the individual.
Yes, I'm sure. And I mean, obviously they're trying to analyze these data sets from spread over decades. Actually, they're going back, looking at data from the previous century in some cases. Most of it is pre-pandemic. And as I say, I haven't been through this with a fine-tooth comb either, because it's a quite heavy-going academic paper. But so far as I can see, they haven't been able to draw out and analyze whether people are working from home or working in the office specifically. And probably there wouldn't be enough data pre-pandemic to compare that with. But I think it feels to me like there's a huge difference psychologically with being monitored in somebody else's office or being monitored in your own personal space.
Yes.
Which this doesn't really address. This idea that somehow your work is reaching into your home to monitor you. It's reaching in anyway when you've got to do it there, when you might not have chosen to. But the fact that they're somehow tracking you as well adds a whole new layer of intrusiveness, which I find incredibly uncomfortable to think about.
Yeah, I also hadn't thought of that. And I have one more thought around this, and it's slightly outside of the study, that the Microsoft environment in particular, and I'm sure lots of others, give people who have admin powers or who are given admin powers a lot of data about behavior. Like sometimes it's anonymous, but you can really, it gives you so much data about what people, especially as a cohort, are doing online. Like how many people opened your particular email telling them X, or how many people have read the blog post that you've published in the intranet, and stuff like that. And I think that it's really interesting how on the one hand, it's got all the negative effects, but on the other hand, some people are really interested because they have real live data about an aspect of engagement. But again, feeling how does that feel to know that actually, in fact, sometimes I'm careful in what I click on links in like newsletters I receive.
Yeah,
because I don't know if that I want to register that.
Yes, it's being signaled. Those clicks are being analysed, and you kind of expect that in the commercial space.
Yes.
You know that that's happening, but when it's your workplace, and if it's happening in your spare bedroom as well, I don't know, there's just something slightly more intrusive about it. And I'm just flicking through the discussion of their results. They do acknowledge that these are hugely varied data sets, and it's quite hard to draw conclusions from them together, but it does sound like the overall conclusion supports pretty much what was found in each study anyway. But there's no sort of generally accepted measure of electronic measuring.
So there is all of this. So there's the fact that we are feeling, some people are feeling like they have to say they're there. Then other people are being nervous as at being tracked to whether they're there or what they're doing. And then you put a new dimension into the whole thing with this article about Microsoft and Meta partnership brings Office 365 apps to the metaverse, as if we couldn't have more presence.
Yeah. Well, I'm just really nerdy about this stuff. I'm basically trying to get to a point in my professional career where I can justify buying a VR headset as a business expense. So I thought I would throw this in. Yeah. So do you want to have meetings in VR? What do you think? Apparently the headset's more comfortable now. It should be at that price point of about $1,500. So
okay.
You can now put this thing on apparently for hours at a time, and you can go and have your meetings thanks to this Microsoft Office integration, which is just in its inception. They haven't really built it yet, as far as I can tell. So we're going to be able to use Microsoft Office products, including Teams, in VR. So how about that?
Well, I think for us async advocates, for me, anything that gives us more reasons to be in meetings, and anything that brings us closer to thinking remote work equals a better experience of online meetings, makes me very like, oh no, please. But in the context of what we're talking about today, it did make me think, so what does that mean? Does this mean eventually when you don't need the VR handset in, what do you think, 2, 3, 4 years? I don't know. When you eventually don't need the headset, anymore, not the handset, does that mean that we're going to have to log onto our computers, open up the webcam, take our avatar or whatever, or walk in the office to our seat and sit down, and that's the end of remote work as we know it?
It will just be so integrated into every communication. Who knows? I mean, I think as you said, the headset is going to, obviously the direction of travel there is smaller, lighter, slicker, and I think probably eventually it'll just be like wearing a pair of spectacles or integrated into your existing specs. So you'll just be able to click something, I don't know, or think something and join your meeting. Of course, it's terrifying. And a lot of the Microsoft apps that they're talking about integrating are not things I think of as collaborative anyway. I don't, if you're working on a Word document, you're writing. Why do you need to be in any kind of meeting? I mean, it's useful to be able to collaborate on it asynchronously, but not synchronously.
Well, synchronously is also fun. They do it if you are working on something at the same time and you're coming up with stuff and you're trying, like this morning I was working on a PowerPoint with someone at the same time, but I don't need to.
It's not the norm, is it?
I don't need to go into anything else because the focus is, on the other hand, I'm thinking, am I being really old fashioned? And it's like, well, I don't need to do that because that's not how I've done it for ages.
Yes, and we do have to watch that, don't we? Yes. Because this is, this doesn't exist yet in what they were talking about. This announcement in the last week or two is about what they're building for the future, and it's going to rely on a certain amount of uptake and bandwidth and availability of the devices and everything else, which isn't quite there yet. But it's just really interesting to see the direction that it's going. And for those times that we do need or want a synchronous interaction, I think it's a good way of doing it. I think 10 years ago, we thought it would be holograms.
Yes.
And we'd all just kind of have people materialize in front of us. And I still think there's lots of AR applications which are going to be interesting like that. But I think there's something about the idea of going somewhere to attend a meeting or an event that VR works quite nicely with, if you can get to the point that the technology is abstracted away and you don't feel a big uncomfy headset sitting on your face, and if it becomes real enough. I think one of the things they talked about in this announcement was adding legs to the avatars, which just sounds like, is this important? But actually, it's quite weird, these things bobbing about with no legs, and that you don't really need legs to have a meeting, mostly. I think it's kind of weird meeting if you did. But you kind of take for granted that the person opposite you has got legs. I don't know. So if they suddenly moved around and they hadn't, that could be quite jarring and knock you out of the reality. and make you remember you're in a virtual space. So it's the fact that they're addressing these kind of hygiene factors in the background that maybe the legs don't need to do a lot, but they need to be kind of there.
Yeah.
Really weird.
That's fascinating. I picked up on the Quest Pro. It is also said to have more intuitive feedback on its hand controllers and what's called real-time expression tracking, in which the user's virtual avatar mimics the facial expressions, such as smiles and winks, of its real-life counterpart. And this reminds me, have you seen Maya, the avatars in Zoom?
No, I saw the announcement. I haven't played with it yet.
Oh, they are so cute. So basically,
we're going to have to try that in a meeting then.
Yes. I was waiting for someone the other day, so I started to play with stuff, and there was like a mouse or something, and it's true, it doesn't catch hands. I think I don't remember that it did hands, but the movement of the head and the expressions, it's amazing. So
brilliant. I've got to have a look at that then.
Yes,
I'm sure there's going to be mistakes though. I mean, let's remember everything that happened during the pandemic when people were doing this for the first time, sometimes in live broadcasts, sometimes in high stakes recorded meetings, and ending up showing up as a cat or whatever. So make sure you know how to turn it off before you get too carried away with these things. Just a little PSA there.
Yeah, so that's good. I mean, I'm going to finish with this quote. Well, unless you have something to add, of course, Maya. That I don't like, and it's going back to the fact that collaboration does not mean meetings. When Nadella has said, "We're bringing the Microsoft Teams immersive meeting experience to MetaQuest in order to give people new ways to connect with each other. Now you can connect, share, and collaborate as though you are together in person." And it really brings me back to this thing of, in essence, the remote work as we knew it before so many people were forced to do it. It was an option to work differently. And I'm just really worried that as the technology makes it easier to be as if we're in person with each other, that we forget that there are times when we don't want to be in person with each other, and that there are ways of working that don't require that synchronicity. So
it's not the ideal that we're aspiring to recreate the office. A lot of people are so relieved to be away from it. It's a bit like when people start working from home and they think, I must build an office exactly like my cubicle in my spare bedroom. It's like, well, no, think about what environment you actually want to work in, and how, this is a chance to do it the way you would have designed it, not, a sort of basic cookie cutter IKEA desk. And this is the same thing. If you think that's the default of how work should be done, it just shows a bit of a lack of imagination in some cases. So it's not who wants to be as if we were in the office all the time.
Yeah, it's the opportunity to do things differently, seeing as we are doing things differently. So listeners, we've got a few minutes of community news. I just wanted to say hello to some people, but we've been talking about the remote work productivity theater, the productivity theater, as the Vox.com called it. We talked about async privilege. And then we had a look at electronic monitoring. And finally, VR is coming to an office, in fact, to the Microsoft Office near you.
I suppose just to join up the first article with the last one is, are we going to be able to send our avatars to the meeting instead of us? Rather than jiggle our mouse, can we just send a virtual Maya to go and meet that client while I'll go to the beach or something? Maybe that's what we need somebody to build.
Well, but that would solve one of the things that they're saying they're doing in the presenteeism thing when they're just going to meetings they don't need to be in. You see, I like that.
We put these articles together for a reason, even if we didn't know what it was at the time. There's been lots of stuff. We could review a dozen articles about people taking on more than one job because their work doesn't fill their time remotely. They can get away with it. So if we have this virtual presence as well, then we're literally cloning ourselves digitally. We can take on as many jobs as we can handle. Then I think managers ought to start worrying about people not being present and productive.
Amazing. Right. Well, before we go, I wanted to say a big, big hello to Igor, who is someone who's been listening to the show for a while. He still listens. And he was telling me about how his team have really embraced the concept of real flexibility and using the online space to give the team flexibility also when interacting with collaborators. And it's become a part of their identity. So
Brilliant.
it's really, yes. So I just want to say a big hello. I also want to say hello to a listener who I don't know called Richard, because he suggested a lady called Shannon Teague to be a guest on the show. And I hope to record with her at some point. And she does remote hiring. So I just asked Shannon, so who pointed you to us? And he said, oh, someone you don't know, he listens to the show. So Richard, if that's you. Hello, thank you very much. Just before I rattle off, Maya, anything else you want to say?
No, just likewise, hello to everyone listening. It's lovely when we get those little kind of callbacks to people that we don't know who's that. This is such a one-way process, and it's lovely when we get those little bits joining up again.
So say hello to us. Say hello to us. If you can send us an email, pilar@virtualnotdistant.com. You can go on Twitter, where we are @virtualteamwork with a 0 instead of an O on work. You can follow us on LinkedIn on the page, which, to be honest, is so quiet at the moment. But you can sign up to our monthly newsletter over at virtualnotdistant.com, and you can send us a message through there. Make sure you are subscribed to the show, especially if you're listening now through a browser, through the internet. Just get a podcast app and subscribe to 21st Century Work-Life Podcast. And of course, thank you very much, Ross. I hope you have a great time polishing the audio on this show. Listeners, thank you very much for listening. A big thank you to Ross Winter for polishing the audio of this episode. And thank you, listeners, for choosing to listen to the 21st Century Work-Life Podcast. Remember to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, and you can check out the full show notes over at virtualnotdistant.com/podcasts. Talking of podcasts, we have another show you can listen to, Management Cafe, which you should also be able to find on all podcast apps. I have been Pilar Ortiz. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.